Listen, there is a whisper beneath the roar of the Pacific. It's a sound older than nations, older than the pyramids, older than memory itself. It speaks of a world that once was. A place of impossible mountains and cities of crystal, a cradle of civilization that vanished into the deep, taking its secrets with it. We walk on a thin crust of rock, believing our history is written in the soil beneath our feet. But the true story, the ancient story, might be written in the ocean's abyss. It is a story of a forgotten dawn, a continent called Lemuria. This is not just a tale of land that sank. It is the story of a people who walked before us, whose echoes are found in our blood and our oldest myths. It is a mystery written in water and stone, a puzzle scattered across half the world. To follow its trail is to question everything we know about our past. So come, step to the edge of the known world, look out across the endless blue, and imagine what lies forgotten beneath the waves. The whisper in the stone, the story of Lemuria, does not begin with a discovery in the ocean, but with a puzzle on dry land. In the 19th century, scientists were pulling strange bones from the earth. They found fossils of a small, fuzzy creature called a lemur. These fossils were found in Madagascar, off the coast of Africa. And then more lemur fossils were found thousands of miles away in India and Sri Lanka. This was a problem. How could the same animal exist on lands separated by a vast, deep ocean? These creatures could not swim such distances. The idea of continents moving was a wild fantasy. So, scientists proposed a different, daring solution. Perhaps the map of the world was not always as it is today. In 1864, a British zoologist named Philip Sclater gave this lost land a name. He called it Lemuria, a proposed ancient continent that once bridged the Indian Ocean, providing a land bridge for these animals to roam. It was a scientific idea, a phantom continent drawn on maps to solve a riddle of bones. But something happened to this dry, scientific theory. It slipped from the pages of academic journals and fell into the human soul. The moment the word Lemuria was spoken, it began to gather stories like a magnet gathers iron. Theosophists, members of a spiritual society seeking ancient wisdom, seized upon the idea. A woman named Helena Blavatsky, in her massive 1888 book, The Secret Doctrine, transformed Lemuria from a land bridge for lemurs into the homeland of the third root race of humanity. In her telling, Lemuria was not just a continent, it was an epic. Her Lemurians were giant, egg-laying, psychic beings with a third eye. They coexisted with dinosaurs. They built colossal cities. They were the ancestors of all human spirituality, a race that fell into darkness and sorcery before their home was destroyed. Blavatsky claimed she learned all this from an ancient, secret book called the Book of D. Zion, which she said was older than humanity itself. From here, Lemuria was no longer science. It became a myth, a spiritual lost world, and the myth spread like wildfire. Other writers and mystics added their own colors to the tapestry. They placed Lemuria in the Pacific Ocean, a vast continent stretching from the coast of California to the shores of Asia. They called it Mu, a name given by a traveler named Augustus Le Plongeon, who believed he had translated Mayan texts telling of a sunken land. The Lemurians in these new stories became a race of advanced beings. They were masters of crystal energy, possessing technology that we would consider magic. They lived in harmony with nature, their society one of peace and profound knowledge. Their continent was a paradise of sparkling cities, towering temples, and lush, impossible vegetation. It was Atlantis's older, wiser sibling, a Pacific Eden. The legend grew so vivid, so detailed, that it began to feel more real than the world around it. People could almost see the gentle, wise Lemurians walking their crystal halls, could almost hear the hum of their power sources deep within the earth. This was the birth of the mystery. A scientific suggestion had become a ghost in the collective mind of humanity, a deep, persistent memory of a golden age. The search was no longer for lemur bones. It was for our own forgotten beginning. The whisper had become a call. Echoes in the water, the call of Lemuria, now a powerful cultural myth, demanded a physical answer. If such a magnificent civilization had existed, where were its bones? Where were the shattered columns, the sunken plazas, the fingerprints of giants in the stone? The vast Pacific Ocean, covering a third of our planet, became the focus. Its blue expanse was no longer just water. It was a blanket drawn over a grave. And so the hunters began to look. They started not with sonar and submersibles, but with maps, both ancient and suspiciously accurate. They looked at the strange puzzle pieces of the Pacific Basin. They saw the thousands of isolated islands, from the massive mountains of Hawaii to the tiny atolls of the Marshall Islands. Could these be the last drowned peaks of a sunken world? The scattered fragments of a shattered continent? The idea took hold that these islands were not random volcanic births, but the skeletal remains of Lemuria, poking through the ocean's skin like the spine of a buried leviathan. And then came the stories. The hunters listened not to scientists, but to the indigenous peoples living on the fringes of the great ocean. They found a chorus of memory, a shared nightmare etched into oral tradition. Across Polynesia, from Hawaii to New Zealand, the legends spoke of a great flood, a catastrophic event called the Kaya Kahinarii, or similar names, where the sea rose in fury and swallowed lands whole. The Maori spoke of Hawaii, a distant ancestral homeland lost to the waves. In India, ancient Tamil texts, thousands of years old, sang of Kumari Kandam, a vast continent south of India that was consumed by the ocean. The stories described great cities, rivers, and mountains, and a sophisticated people whose knowledge was scattered with the land. These were not vague tales. They were detailed, emotional accounts of loss. For the mystery hunters, this was proof. These were not coincidences. These were the surviving memories of a cataclysm, passed down from generation to generation by the survivors who fled to the highlands that remained. The water held the land, and the people held the story. But the most compelling echoes came from a place of immense, silent stone, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. This tiny, isolated speck of land, thousands of miles from any continent, stood as a profound question mark. Upon it, the colossal stone figures, the moai, stared with empty eyes across the ocean. Who were they watching for? Why were they built here on this remote island with such impossible effort? To the Lemurian seekers, the answer was obvious. Easter Island was not a beginning, it was an end. It was a mountaintop of lost Lemuria, a final refuge. The moai were not portraits of local chieftains, but solemn guardians, memorials to the lost continent, erected by the last Lemurians as a warning or a monument to their fallen glory. The island's strange, undeciphered Rongorongo script, carved on wooden tablets, was seen as a last fragment of the Lemurian language, a final message from a drowned world. Every unexplained artifact in the Pacific became a piece of the Lemurian puzzle. The Nan Madol basalt city in Pohnpei, the ancient terraces of Bada Valley in Indonesia, the megalithic structures across Micronesia. The ocean was no longer empty. It was a museum, and every island was an exhibit labeled Lemuria. The whispers had become echoes, and the echoes were growing into a roar of evidence, waiting for a key to turn the lock of history. The map-makers and the dreamers, as the 20th century dawned, the hunt for Lemuria shifted from folklore and spiritualism into the hands of men who believed they could prove it with facts. These were the map-makers of the lost, the dreamers with data. They scoured the young science of geology, looking for clues in the very bones of the earth. One tantalizing piece of evidence was the concept of continental shelves. These are the submerged, shallow edges of continents that extend out under the sea before dropping off into the deep abyss. Looking at a map of the Pacific, some researchers saw a pattern. They traced lines connecting the islands along these submerged shelves, from the Philippines down to New Guinea and across to New Zealand. This region, they proposed, was not a random collection of islands. It was the visible remnant of a sunken continental plate, which they named Sunda. And beyond it, in the deep Pacific, might have lain its even larger, completely vanished brother, Lemuria or Mu. The idea gave a scientific-sounding framework to the myth. It suggested the Pacific floor was not just basaltic ocean crust, but contained drowned continental rock, the graveyard of a landmass. The most famous of these evidential dreamers was a man named James Churchward. A former British soldier, Churchward claimed that in the 1880s, while helping famine victims in India, he befriended a high-ranking temple priest. This priest, he said, revealed to him a set of ancient, secret clay tablets written in a lost language, the language of Mu itself. Over years, Churchward learned to decipher them. What they told him was the complete history of the motherland. In his books, beginning with The Lost Continent of Mu in 1926, Churchward painted a picture of breathtaking detail. He gave Lemuria a precise geography, a vast continent stretching from north of Hawaii down to the tropics. He described its 64 million inhabitants, its 7 great cities, its government under a divine ruler called the Ra. He explained their science, which harnessed a cosmic force called Vril, and their religion, which worshipped the sun as a symbol of the one God. Most importantly, Churchward gave it a tragic end. He described how massive underground gas chambers, weakened by volcanic activity, collapsed. The continent, he wrote, shuddered, groaned, and was swallowed by the fiery ocean in a single catastrophic day. His work was a sensation. It was presented not as fantasy, but as recovered history, complete with translations and diagrams. For thousands of readers, Churchward didn't just imagine Lemuria. He had found its library. But the map makers faced a growing wall of opposition, the rigid, emerging science of plate tectonics. By the mid-20th century, geologists had a powerful new theory to explain the Earth's surface. The continents weren't fixed. They were massive plates floating on a molten mantle, slowly drifting over millions of years. They could collide to build mountains or rift apart to create new oceans. This theory beautifully explained the distribution of fossils, the matching coastlines of continents like Africa and South America, and the patterns of earthquakes and volcanoes. For mainstream science, plate tectonics delivered a fatal blow to the idea of Lemuria as a recently sunken continent in the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean basin, they showed, was primarily ancient, dense oceanic crust. There was no geological room, no mechanism, for a large continental landmass to have simply sunk there within the time frame of human civilization. The weight of evidence seemed to crush the myth. The scientific establishment dismissed Lemuria entirely, relegating it to the realm of pseudoscience and Victorian fantasy. The dreamers were accused of seeing patterns where none existed, of weaving grand tales from geological coincidence and human longing. The continent, it seemed, had not only sunk into the sea, it had sunk into disrepute. The whisper was being silenced by the loud, clear voice of modern geology. Yet, for those who believed, the silence from science was not an answer. It was a challenge. If the continent didn't sink as a whole, perhaps its people fled before a slower disaster. The hunt would now have to become more clever, looking not for a drowned land, but for the survivors who carried its legacy ashore. The trail of the survivors, if the continent itself was lost to the abyss, then its truth must have escaped upon the waves. This became the new conviction. The seekers shifted their gaze from the ocean floor to the shorelines that ringed the Pacific. They began to look for a different kind of evidence, not drowned cities, but living fingerprints. They searched for cultural seeds that seemed to have blown across impossible distances, carried by a people fleeing a dying homeland. The trail of the survivors became a puzzle of astonishing connections, a global game of connect the dots that defied conventional history. They saw the same strange patterns appearing in civilizations that, according to textbooks, had never met. The most haunting of these patterns was the megalith. Across the world, from the moai of Easter Island to the stone gods of the Polynesian Mare, from the cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru to the mysterious basalt columns of Nan Madol in Micronesia, there was a shared language of monumental stone. The builders seemed to possess a common, forgotten knowledge of how to cut, move, and stack rocks of immense weight with a precision that baffled modern engineers. To the Lemurian hunters, this was no coincidence. This was the signature of a shared ancestral technology, a stone masonry tradition carried from the motherland by refugee colonies who settled on foreign shores and tried to rebuild their lost glory in stone. The biological world offered another tantalizing trail. They pointed to the global distribution of certain plants, like the sweet potato. This tuber was domesticated in South America. Yet, centuries before European contact, it was found growing across Polynesia. How did it cross thousands of miles of open ocean? Mainstream archaeologists proposed daring voyages by Polynesian sailors. But for the believers in a lost continent, the answer was simpler. The sweet potato, like the people who cultivated it, was a survivor of Lemuria. Its presence on both sides of the Pacific was a botanical memory of a time when the ocean was narrower, or dotted with stepping stone islands that were now gone. Similarly, they looked at linguistic roots, tracing seemingly similar words for mother, or sky, or water, across disparate languages from India to the Americas, building a case for a primordial Lemurian mother tongue from which all others splintered. But the most powerful trail was written in blood and bone, the enigmatic story of the Polynesians themselves. These incredible voyagers who navigated the trackless Pacific by reading stars, waves, and birds possessed an oral history that spoke of a great migration from a homeland in the West, a place they often called Haviki or Kahiki. To the Lemurian seekers, this was not a mythical place, but a geographical memory. They envisioned the collapse of Mu not as an instant event, but as a slow dying, a series of cataclysms, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic fires that spanned generations. In this telling, the Lemurians were a maritime civilization, the world's first great sailors. As their homeland fragmented and sank, they took to their great vessels, vimanas or giant catamarans, in a series of exoduses. One wave sailed west, reaching India and influencing the ancient Tamil culture and its legends of Kumari Kandam. Another wave sailed east, populating the surviving peaks of their continent that we now call Polynesia. A third wave sailed to the Americas, bringing their knowledge of pyramids, astronomy, and stonework to the emerging cultures of the Andes and Mesoamerica. This theory made the entire Pacific Rim a diaspora. The Olmec heads of Mexico, with their unusual features, became portraits of Lemurian sea kings. The elongated skulls of paracas in Peru became signs of the distinct Lemurian physiology. Every anomalous artifact became a breadcrumb on the survivors' trail. The continent was gone, but its children were everywhere, their heritage a ghost in the cultural DNA of the world. The story was no longer about finding a sunken land. It was about recognizing its reflection in the mirror of humanity itself. The modern hunt, sonar and skepticism, the late 20th and early 21st centuries brought tools to the hunt that the old dreamers could never have imagined. The romantic searches based on maps and myths gave way to the cold, precise gaze of technology. The first and most obvious place to look was the very bottom of the sea. Submersibles, bathymetric sonar, and satellite altimetry began to map the ocean floor in exquisite detail, peeling back the blue veil to reveal a landscape more dramatic than any on land. Endless plains, volcanic seamounts, and trenches that plunged miles deep. The hunters scanned these new maps with desperate hope, looking for the straight lines, right angles, and geometric patterns that shouted human hands. Occasionally, a tantalizing anomaly would surface. A sonar reading off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, revealed what appeared to be a massive, stepped pyramid structure submerged about 100 feet below the waves. With its flat terraces, sharp edges, and what looked like a carved face, Yonaguni became an instant rallying point. Was this a Lemurian temple, a monument drowned by rising seas at the end of the last ice age? Marine geologists were quick to counter. They explained the structure as entirely natural, a masterpiece of sandstone fracturing and erosion from strong ocean currents. The face was a trick of pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see patterns where none exist. For every believer who saw a carved staircase, a skeptic saw a textbook example of jointed rock. This clash between the eye of faith and the lens of science defined the modern hunt. Another discovery, this one via satellite, sparked similar controversy. Off the western coast of India in the Gulf of Combat, researchers announced they had identified through sonar the outlines of a vast submerged city. They called it the Gulf of Combat Cultural Complex, reporting the traces of streets, walls, and structures at depth that suggested an age of over 9,000 years. Artifacts recovered from the site, including what were described as tools and pottery shards, seemed to promise a revolution in history, potentially pushing the dawn of Indian civilization back thousands of years, perhaps even connecting to the lost Kumari kingdom of Tamil legend. But the scientific community pushed back hard. The sonar images were ambiguous. The artifacts recovered by dredging, critics argued, could have been shaped by natural tidal forces, and their dating was fiercely disputed. The site became a battleground, a symbol of the deepening rift. To skeptics, it was a case of wishful thinking amplified by technology. To believers, it was proof that academia was too rigid, too afraid to rewrite the history books, actively ignoring evidence that lay outside the accepted narrative. The battlefield then expanded to genetics. With the advent of DNA analysis, a new, powerful tool emerged to trace human migration. The Lemurian hypothesis predicted a deep, ancient connection between populations across the Pacific Rim, a shared ancestry that diverged from a central point. Initial genetic studies of Polynesian peoples showed a clear lineage leading back through Southeast Asia to Taiwan, a migration path known as the express train model. This seemed to deal another blow to the idea of an Eastern Pacific homeland. But then more nuanced data emerged, revealing a more complex story. Studies found faint, ancient genetic signals in some Amazonian tribes that suggested a very early and poorly understood link to Australasian populations. This mysterious Signal X was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of a migration that current models couldn't easily explain. For Lemurian advocates, this was the smoking gun in the bloodstream of humanity. It was evidence of that early, forgotten diaspora from a central Pacific homeland, a genetic echo of Mu. The mainstream scientific response was caution, suggesting other possible routes like a coastal migration along the North Pacific Rim. But the seed was planted. The modern hunt had moved from stone and sonar to the very code of life itself. It was no longer about finding a single sunken city, but about unraveling a prehistoric mystery written in human DNA. The continent remained elusive, but the question had evolved. Were we not all, in some deep cellular way, survivors of a forgotten world? The living legend and the hidden hope the failure to find a definitive sunken Atlantis in the Pacific did not kill the legend of Lemuria. Instead, it transformed it. It migrated from the realm of physical archaeology into something more potent and enduring, a living, spiritual truth. In the latter half of the 20th century, as the world grew more interconnected and disillusioned with modern materialism, Lemuria found a new home. It became a cornerstone of the New Age movement, a symbol of everything humanity had lost and could potentially regain. No longer just a lost continent, it was reimagined as a lost state of consciousness. The Lemurians were now seen not merely as an ancient race, but as our own spiritual ancestors who lived in a golden age of psychic unity, heart-centered living, and harmony with the Earth's energies. Their supposed downfall was not just a geological tragedy, but a spiritual one, a fall into separation, ego, and the misuse of power, which led to their physical destruction. This narrative resonated deeply. It offered an explanation for the loneliness and conflict of the modern world. We were the scattered, amnesiac children of a broken paradise. This spiritual Lemuria was given a surprising new capital, Mount Shasta. This solitary, snow-capped volcano in northern California, already sacred to Native American tribes, became the focal point for a modern myth. Stories began to circulate in the 1970s and 80s, published in underground newsletters and shared at crystal shops, that claimed Mount Shasta was not just a mountain, but a refuge. According to these tales, the most spiritually advanced Lemurians had foreseen the cataclysm. Using their mastery of vibration and light, they did not flee across the ocean. They went inside. They retreated into a vast, crystalline city hidden within the hollow heart of Mount Shasta, a place called Telos. Here, these ascended beings, often called the Lemurian Council of Light, were said to live in ageless peace, tending to the Earth's energy grid and awaiting the day when humanity on the surface would awaken and be ready to reunite with them. Sightings of tall, graceful, robed figures in the forests around Shasta, stories of strange lights in the sky above its peak, and accounts of mysterious, wise strangers appearing in local towns to share teachings, all fed the legend. Shasta became a pilgrimage site. People hiked its slopes not to find pottery shards, but to feel the vibrations, to meditate at portals, and to hope for a glimpse of the hidden world. The mountain itself became the proof, a geological anchor for a metaphysical homeland. This transition from history to spirituality changed the nature of the search entirely. The quest was no longer for ruins, but for resonance. The evidence for Lemuria became personal and experiential. It was found in the feeling of déjà vu upon visiting a Pacific island, in the inexplicable pull toward certain crystals, especially pink Lemurian quartz, said to be encoded with the ancient knowledge, in the past life regressions where thousands reported remembering lives as peaceful Lemurian priests or healers. For believers, this collective, subjective experience was more valid than any skeptical scientific paper. It was a memory rising from the collective unconscious, from what the philosopher Carl Jung might have called the archetype of the lost paradise. The hidden hope was no longer that a diver would find a carved column. It was that humanity itself would undergo a shift, a Lemurian awakening, to reclaim our forgotten heritage of unity and peace. The continent had sunk in the physical realm only to rise, more powerful than ever in the realm of spirit and symbol. It became a mirror held up to our own deepest longing. The hope that our origins were noble, that our current strife is not our natural state, and that a forgotten wholeness waits to be remembered not in the ocean's depths, but within ourselves. The counter-narrative, a continent of imagination amidst the sonar pings and spiritual yearnings, a steady, forceful voice arose from the academic world. It sought not to explore the mystery, but to dismantle it. This was the counter-narrative, a meticulous effort to explain how a continent could be born not from tectonic shifts, but from the shifting sands of human need. The scholars and scientists who built this counter-narrative started at the beginning with Philip Sclater's lemurs. They explained that the land bridge theory was a legitimate scientific hypothesis for its time, born of a fundamental misunderstanding. In the 19th century, the mechanisms of evolution and distribution were poorly understood. The concept of continental drift was heretical. When faced with identical fossils on disparate shores, a land bridge was the most logical, conservative solution. Lemuria was a respectable placeholder, a speculative contour on the map of ignorance. But then, science moved on. The discovery of plate tectonics provided the real, elegant answer. The lemurs of Madagascar and those of India were not separated by a sunken continent. They were separated by a continent that had moved. India, once attached to Africa and Antarctica, had rafted northward across the Indian Ocean over tens of millions of years, carrying its cargo of ancient life with it before colliding with Asia. The land bridge was not needed. The scientific Lemuria was rendered obsolete, a phantom erased by a better map. But the myth persisted. Why? The counter-narrative turned to psychology and sociology. Historians of ideas began to trace the path of the myth as it left the laboratory and entered the salon. They pointed to the Victorian era, a time of rapid, disorienting change. Industrialization, colonialism, and Darwin's theory of evolution were appending the old certainties of religion and society. In this turmoil, the counter-narrative argues, people experienced a deep nostalgia for a purer, more spiritual past. Theosophy, with its elaborate, secret history of root races, offered an appealing alternative. It replaced a chaotic, materialistic view of evolution with a guided, spiritual one. Lemuria, as the home of the third root race, served a specific purpose. It provided a majestic, ancient pedigree for humanity that was not based in biblical Genesis, yet still placed humans at the center of a cosmic, purposeful drama. It was a comforting story in an age of doubt. The myth spread, they argue, because it was useful. It gave meaning, it promised hidden wisdom, and it flattered its adherents with the idea that they were the spiritual heirs of an advanced, lost civilization. Furthermore, the counter-narrative dissects the so-called evidence piece by piece, the shared myths of a great flood. They are universal because flooding is a universal human experience from the Tigris-Euphrates to the Yellow River. Monumental stonework. It represents not a shared source, but a shared solution to a common problem. How to build things that last, using the most abundant material available. The parallels in language and culture are explained by analogous development. Different peoples, facing similar challenges, often arrive at similar solutions independently. The genetic signal X in the Americas. Most population geneticists see it as a faint trace of an early, poorly understood migration from Asia along the northern rim of the Pacific, not a Pacific crossing from a central continent. The counter-narrative builds a powerful case. Lemuria is not a forgotten history, but a cultural construct, a continent of imagination built from misunderstood science, spiritual yearning, and the compelling human tendency to see connections where there are only coincidences. It is a mirror, they say, but one that reflects our own desires for a lost golden age, not a real place in our past. In this view, the true mystery is not beneath the Pacific, but within the human mind that so desperately wants to put it there. The unanswered riddles, stubborn stones and silent scripts even under the weight of the counter-narrative, certain pieces of the puzzle refuse to lie flat. They are the anomalies, the stubborn stones that cannot be easily swept into the tidy bin of coincidence or independent invention. These are not proofs of a sunken continent, but they are profound questions marks etched into the landscape of the known world. And for those who listen for Lemuria's whisper, they are its most persistent echoes. Consider the mystery of the moai on Easter Island. Mainstream archaeology has built a compelling story of a Polynesian society that grew isolated, competed through statue building, and collapsed from ecological overuse. Yet the questions that vexed the first Europeans remain. How, with no metal tools, no wheels, and no large animals, did a few thousand people carve nearly 1,000 multi-ton statues, transport them miles across rough terrain, and erect them on massive stone platforms? The oral traditions speak of the statues walking with the spiritual power or mana of chiefs. Engineers have demonstrated plausible methods involving ropes, rocking, and sledges. But the scale and the sheer, audacious will of the project still feels staggering. To the Lemurian seeker, the effort makes more sense if it was an act of cultural memory, a desperate, monumental effort by the last custodians of a greater civilization to preserve their identity on the highest remaining rock of their drowned world. The moai do not face inland to watch over villages. They gaze outward, across the empty ocean, as if awaiting a return or mourning a loss. Then there is the silent script, Rongorongo. Discovered on Easter Island in the 19th century, these wooden tablets covered in intricate glyphs of birds, fish, plants, and geometric forms constitute one of the few potentially independent writing systems in Oceania. No one has convincingly deciphered it. Its purpose is unknown. Its origins are a mystery. Linguists debate if it is truly writing or a form of proto-writing, and many believe it was invented after European contact, inspired by the writing the islanders saw on Spanish ships. But this explanation feels unsatisfactory to many. The glyphs have a deeply organic, ancient style, completely unlike European alphabets. If it was an independent invention, it is a breathtaking intellectual achievement in one of the most remote places on Earth. The Lemurian narrative offers a different possibility. That Rongorongo is not an invention, but a relic. It is the last degenerated fragment of the written language of Mu, preserved by the priestly class on this last refuge, its meaning fading even as the glyphs were carefully copied onto rare wood. Its undeciphered state is not an accident. It is the final silence of a drowned culture. Beyond Easter Island, the riddles multiply. The monumental city of Nan Madol, built on a coral reef off the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia, is a maze of artificial islets and walls constructed from millions of basalt logs, some weighing up to 50 tons. Local legend says it was built by twin sorcerers using the power of a flying dragon. Archaeologists see the seat of the powerful Saudeleur dynasty, but the logistics are, again, mind-boggling. How were these stones quarried, transported across water, and stacked with such precision? The knowledge required seems to belong to a people with a long history of megalithic engineering. Similarly, the ancient terraces and megalithic sculptures of Bada Valley in Sulawesi, or the unexplained pyramidal mounds of Gunung Padang in Indonesia, which some controversial studies suggest could be vastly older than accepted history, all present profound challenges to the standard timeline of Pacific habitation and technological development. These places do not connect to form the outline of a continent. Instead, they stand as isolated, monumental question marks, outposts of a mystery. They are the stubborn stones that refuse to tell a simple story, silent scripts in a language of architecture we have forgotten how to read. In their shadow, the official history of the Pacific feels incomplete, like a book with crucial chapters torn out. The counter-narrative explains the myth, but it cannot always fully explain the stone. The cataclysm, fire, water, and memory. To believe in Lemuria is to believe in a world-ending event of unimaginable violence. The story demands a cataclysm. But what force could erase a continent? The seekers look to geology not to disprove, but to find a disaster terrible enough to match the legend. They found it not in the slow drift of plates, but in the sudden, furious violence of the planet's interior. The Pacific Ocean is ringed by the Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped belt of intense volcanic and seismic activity. This is where tectonic plates dive beneath one another in a process called subduction, creating trenches, fueling volcanoes, and unleashing earthquakes. To the Lemurian narrative, this volatile ring is not just a geological feature. It is the scar tissue, the lasting wound from the death throes of Mu. Imagine, they propose, a period of unprecedented geological unrest. The vast, gas-chambered caverns beneath the continental plate, as described by Churchward, or a series of colossal mantle plumes, superheated columns of rock rising from the Earth's core, weakening the crust from below. The land would have groaned with constant tremors. Volcanoes, not just at the edges but across the heartland, would have erupted in curtains of fire, raining ash and turning skies black. Then, the final trigger. Perhaps a massive asteroid strike in the Pacific Basin, a calamity that left no crater because it punched into the already thinned crust. Or the simultaneous eruption of a supervolcano, a Yellowstone-scale event, but magnified across a continent. The most compelling scientific analog for the Lemurian cataclysm, however, is the concept of a mega-tsunami. A colossal earthquake along a subduction zone, or a catastrophic volcanic flank collapse into the sea, can generate a wave hundreds of feet high, traveling at jet speed across the open ocean. Now, imagine not one but a series of these events, reverberating across the dying continent. The low-lying coastal cities, the glittering ports, the fertile valleys would have been scoured clean by walls of water and debris not once, but repeatedly. The land itself, fractured and hollowed, would have begun to sink, either in a slow regional subsidence or in massive, sudden collapses. The skies would have been choked for years, plunging the world into a volcanic winter. This paints a picture not of a continent neatly sliding beneath the waves, but of a civilization being systematically, horrifically dismantled by fire, earthquake, flood, and darkness. This cataclysm, they argue, is precisely what is preserved in humanity's oldest memories. The flood myths are not mere stories of local river overflows. They are specific and terrifying. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh speaks of the gods bringing a storm so fierce, even the gods were terrified by the deluge, with a darkness so thick, one could not see another. The Maya Popol Vuh describes a great inundation that came from the heart of the sky, a resinous torrent that fell upon the heads of the first people. The ancient Tamil texts recount that the land of Kumari Kandam was devoured by the angry ocean, with waves that swallowed the mountains. These are not tales of gentle rising tides. They are records of trauma, of a world violently reset. The Lemurian theory weaves these disparate threads into a single tapestry of disaster. The survivors, those who lived on the high continental interior or who escaped in ships, carried this shared nightmare with them to the corners of the earth. The cataclysm became the foundational trauma of humanity, the before and after in our collective story. The lost continent is not just a place, it is the before. And the flood, the fire, the darkness, they are the door that slammed shut, separating us from our origins. In this light, every ancient culture's obsession with celestial cycles, with appeasing the gods of earth and sky, can be seen as an attempt to prevent the cataclysm from ever happening again. The memory of the fire and water is coded into our myths, a warning etched in story, waiting to be understood. The legacy in the stars, celestial maps and forgotten science if the earth had swallowed the physical proof. Perhaps the legacy of Lemuria was written in a place no flood could reach, the night sky. This line of thinking led seekers down a fascinating and complex path, examining the astronomical knowledge of ancient cultures around the Pacific. They discovered a startling consistency, a shared fascination with specific stars, solstices, and cosmic cycles that seemed too precise, too advanced, for the timelines given to these civilizations by mainstream history. The legacy of Lemuria, they proposed, was not just in stone, but in star charts. Consider the Polynesians, the supreme navigators of the open ocean. Their ability to voyage across thousands of miles of trackless water using only the stars, swells, and bird flights is a feat of human knowledge that still astonishes. This was not a simple skill learned overnight. It was a profound, systemic science of the heavens, passed down through chants and star compasses. To the Lemurian believers, this was a surviving fragment of a far more ancient, global system of navigation. It was the knowledge of a seafaring civilization that needed to understand the cosmos to connect its vast, continent-spanning domain. When Mu sank, the survivors took this celestial science with them in their voyaging canoes, preserving it as the most vital tool for survival in a world now dominated by water. This celestial connection extends to stone. Ancient sites across the Pacific Rim are often precisely aligned with astronomical events. The complex of Nan Madol is said to be aligned with the rising of certain stars. The moai of Easter Island, some researchers suggest, are positioned not just to watch the ocean, but to mark equinoxes and solstices. In the Americas, the Maya possessed a calendar of staggering complexity, tracking cycles of time thousands of years long. The question that haunts the edge of Orthodox history is, why? Why did cultures supposedly emerging from hunter-gatherer societies suddenly develop such an obsessive, sophisticated need to map the precession of the equinoxes or predict eclipses centuries in advance? The standard answer involves agriculture and religion. The Lemurian hypothesis offers a more dramatic origin story. They propose that the cataclysm that destroyed their homeland was astronomically triggered, perhaps a cyclical event tied to a long-term cosmic cycle or a near pass of a comet. The survivors, seared by this trauma, vowed never to be caught unaware again. They encoded a warning into their greatest monuments and their most sacred knowledge. Their temples were not just places of worship. They were observatories and calculators, designed to keep eternal watch on the skies for signs of the next disaster. Their calendar was a countdown clock set by their ancestors. This idea of a forgotten global science reaches its peak with the mystery of the ancient maps. The Piri Rise map of 1513, compiled by an Ottoman admiral from older source charts, shows a startlingly accurate outline of the coast of Antarctica, a continent not officially discovered until 1820. Even more controversially, it shows it seemingly free of ice. Geological evidence suggests Antarctica's last ice-free period was millions of years ago. Other portolan charts from the age of exploration seem to depict landmasses with knowledge that should not have existed. To the radical fringes of the Lemurian search, these maps are not anomalies. They are copies of copies, the last faded echoes of a world survey conducted by a pre-Diluvian civilization. In this view, the Lemurians or their Atlantean cousins had mapped the entire globe, including the now icebound coasts of Antarctica, in an epoch when the Earth's climate was different. Their navigators, masters of both the sea and the stars, charted the world. A few of these maps, stored in ancient libraries like Alexandria, survived in fragments and found their way into the hands of medieval cartographers. If true, it means the legacy of that lost world was literally the map of our own, a ghost image of a known world from a forgotten age, hiding in plain sight in our museums. The science of Lemuria, therefore, becomes a haunting possibility. That before the flood, humanity had already climbed a great peak of understanding, only to be thrown back into the dark, clutching only tattered star charts and broken maps, forced to begin the long climb all over again. The biological enigma, echoes in the blood and the soil beyond the stones and the stars. The most intimate evidence for a lost world may be written within living things. The biological enigma forms a quiet, persistent undercurrent in the Lemurian mystery, a trail of clues not carved in rock, but encoded in genes and rooted in earth. It begins with the plants. The flora of isolated Pacific islands often presents a puzzle. Species are found scattered across impossible watery gaps, their seeds incapable of surviving a long ocean drift. The classic example is the presence of the Chatham Island forget-me-not, a delicate flower whose closest relatives are found in New Zealand and South America. How did it cross thousands of miles? The mainstream theory involves rare, long-distance dispersal by wind or birds over millions of years. But to a Lemurian botanist, the distribution makes perfect sense if these islands were once connected, or at least much closer together, as mountain peaks and highlands of a larger continent. The plants did not cross an ocean. They simply grew across a landscape that later vanished, leaving their descendants stranded on lonely green islands like survivors on life rafts. This botanical mystery finds a parallel in the animal kingdom, returning full circle to the lemurs that gave the continent its name, but expanding far beyond them. The unique and often archaic species found on islands like Madagascar, New Zealand, and New Caledonia speak of long isolation. But their ancestors had to get there somehow. The strange, prehistoric-looking kauri pines of New Zealand, the flightless birds like the kiwi and the extinct moa, the incredible diversity of lemurs in Madagascar. All these are seen by some as relic populations. They are living fossils, not just of species, but of an ecosystem. They are remnants of a flora and fauna that once thrived on a larger, connected landmass. When the cataclysm struck, the lowland creatures and widespread forests were wiped out. Only the hardiest, or those living in the highest refuges, the future islands, survived. These islands, then, are not just geological fragments, but biological arcs, carrying a cargo of life from a sunken world. The silent forests of New Caledonia, filled with ancient, slow-growing Araucaria pines, feel less like jungles and more like living museums, the last exhibits of a lost botanical kingdom. But the most profound biological enigma is within us. The controversial field of population genetics continues to throw up surprises that challenge the simple out-of-Africa migration model in its details. The mysterious Signal X, that faint Australasian genetic marker found in some indigenous Amazonian tribes, remains a tantalizing ghost. While mainstream science proposes a coastal migration route from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge and down the Americas, the Lemurian narrative offers a more direct, if radical, pathway. Could this signal be the trace of a very early, direct trans-Pacific migration? Not a planned voyage, but a desperate flight. Imagine refugees from the sinking western shores of Mu, carried by powerful currents on rafts or simple vessels, surviving a harrowing journey to wash up on the shores of South America. Their numbers would have been small, their genetic imprint faint, but it might have persisted, a whisper in the blood of remote tribes. Furthermore, the incredible physical diversity found across Oceania and the Americas, from the tall, lean Polynesians to the broad-faced, robust features of some South American indigenous groups, is sometimes presented not as independent adaptation, but as the divergent evolution of different tribes or castes of the original Lemurian people, separated for millennia after the diaspora. The biological enigma suggests that the legacy of Lemuria is not just in our stories or our stones, but in the very soil of isolated islands and the double helix of our own DNA. We are, perhaps, walking archives of a lost world, carrying its signature in our cells and cultivating its last flowers in our gardens, unaware of the forgotten continent they once called home. The esoteric core, secrets of vibration and the third eye, as the physical search yielded more questions than answers, a deeper, more hidden stream of the Lemurian myth emerged. This was not about continents or migrations, but about consciousness itself. The esoteric core of the legend proposes that the true treasure of Lemuria was not gold or crystal, but a forgotten understanding of the universe's fundamental nature. In this view, the Lemurians were not merely technologically advanced. They were spiritually and psychically evolved, operating on principles that modern science is only beginning to glimpse. Their mastery was not of machinery, but of vibration, resonance, and the latent energies of the human body and the earth. Central to this belief is the concept of the third eye. Across many spiritual traditions, from Hinduism to Buddhism, the symbol of an inner eye of perception exists. Theosophy placed this idea squarely in Lemuria, claiming the early Lemurians had a physical, functioning third eye in the back of their head, which gave them psychic sight and a direct, intuitive connection to each other and to the spiritual realms. As they fell into materialism, this eye atrophied, retreating inward to become the pineal gland in the modern human brain. For New Age adherents, reactivating this Lemurian sight through meditation, certain crystals and sound is the key to reclaiming our lost heritage. This leads to the idea of a vibrational science. The legends speak of Lemurians building their cities, particularly their temples and healing centers, from specific types of stone, especially quartz crystal, because they understood its piezoelectric properties, its ability to hold and transmit energy. They did not use wires or electricity as we know it. They used tuned crystals and sacred geometry to harness the Earth's own electromagnetic currents, a power source they called vril or prana. Their structures were not randomly placed. They were positioned on ley lines or dragon lines, hypothesized channels of Earth energy, acting as acupuncture needles for the planet, balancing its forces and creating grids of power and communication. The great cataclysm in this esoteric view was not just a geological accident. It was a direct consequence of the Lemurians' own fall from grace. As they drifted from their heart-centered unity, some factions began to experiment with these vibrational forces for selfish gain or warfare, creating catastrophic imbalances in the Earth's subtle energy fields. The planet itself reacted, shaking them off in a violent rebalancing. The sinking of the continent was thus a spiritual consequence made physically manifest. The most enduring symbol of this esoteric Lemuria is the crystal. Specific stones, like Lemurian seed crystals, quartz with distinctive horizontal striations said to be records of the ancient knowledge, are believed to be coded with the wisdom of that time. Meditating with them is thought to be a way of downloading information, not intellectually, but vibrationally into one's own consciousness. This transforms the search for Lemuria from an external archaeology to an internal one. The lost continent is not a place to be found on a map, but a state of being to be recovered within. The hidden hope is that as more individuals awaken to this Lemurian frequency of unity and heart-based consciousness, a critical mass will be reached. This, some believe, might even trigger the revelation of physical evidence, perhaps the opening of the hidden city of Telos within Mount Shasta, or the sudden, collective understanding of sites like the Yanaguni Monument. In this deepest layer of the myth, Lemuria is both our past and our potential future. It is the memory of a time when humanity lived in harmonious resonance with all of creation, and the blueprint for our evolution. The continent sank so that the seed of its knowledge could be buried within us, waiting for the right vibrational key to unlock it once more. The skeptic's fortress. When oceans are not enough despite the soaring spiritual theories and the tantalizing biological whispers, a formidable fortress of skepticism stands guard over mainstream history and science. Its walls are built not on belief, but on a strict code of evidence, and from its battlements, defenders wield powerful arguments against the sunken continent. Their first and strongest weapon is the sheer, immutable reality of plate tectonics. Geologists map the ocean floor with precision. They can identify the dense, basaltic rock of the oceanic crust and the lighter, granitic rock of continents. The Pacific Basin, they demonstrate, is overwhelmingly composed of this old, heavy oceanic crust. There is no room, no hidden mass of continental granite sitting on the seafloor. For a continent to sink, it would have to become denser than the mantle beneath it, a physical impossibility for continental rock. The process of subduction sees oceanic crust diving beneath continents, not the other way around. The skeptics argue that the enduring image of a landmass dramatically vanishing beneath the waves like a sinking ship is a physical fantasy. The Earth's crust simply does not work that way within the time frame of human existence. What can change dramatically, and has, is sea level. At the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted, global sea levels rose by over 120 meters, drowning vast coastal plains worldwide. This, they assert, is the true source of the global flood myths, not a sinking continent, but a rising ocean that swallowed familiar landscapes and forced migrations. The lost lands were continental shelves, not separate continents. Their second line of defense is Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Faced with the monumental ruins of Easter Island or Nan Madol, archaeologists have painstakingly reconstructed plausible human-scale stories. They point to experimental archaeology where teams have successfully moved moai using ropes, logs, and human muscle, proving it could be done with the resources available. They show how the society of Rapa Nui evolved, its statue-building cult emerging from Polynesian roots, not from an external, superior source. The complex society of Nan Madol is shown to have grown organically from Pohnpeian culture over centuries. The skeptics see the Lemurian explanation as a form of intellectual theft, robbing the ingenuity and achievements of indigenous Pacific peoples, and attributing them to a phantom race of super beings. It is, they argue, a modern form of the same colonial mindset that could not believe primitive natives built the great ruins of Zimbabwe or the pyramids, and so invented lost white tribes or Atlanteans as the real architects. Finally, the skeptics address the emotional core of the myth directly. They acknowledge the powerful human longing for a golden age, for a time of unity and lost wisdom. They see Lemuria as a psychic homeland, a projection of our deepest desires for meaning and a nobler origin. In a chaotic, fragmented world, the idea of a single, wise source civilization is profoundly comforting. It simplifies the messy, tangled reality of human prehistory into a clean, dramatic story of rise, fall, and diaspora. The fortress of skepticism, therefore, does not just guard facts. It guards a methodology. It insists that the awe we feel at ancient wonders should drive us to understand the real, complex people who built them, not to invent mythic progenitors to explain them away. The ocean, they conclude, is deep and old, but it is not hiding a continent. It is only hiding our own inability, at times, to accept the incredible, sprawling, and entirely human story of our past, with all its unconnected brilliance and its unexplained, lonely monuments standing silent under the vast Pacific sky. The modern pilgrimage to the islands of question marks the debate between believers and skeptics is not confined to libraries and lecture halls. It fuels a journey, a modern pilgrimage to the scattered sites that form the crumbling edges of the Lemurian mystery. These are not tours in the ordinary sense. They are voyages to the question marks themselves. The pilgrims are a diverse group, earnest researchers with measuring equipment, spiritual seekers with crystals and meditation mats, and curious travelers simply feeling the pull of a profound riddle. Their first stop is often the most iconic, Easter Island. Standing before the brooding moai at Ahu Tongariki as the sun rises, The sound of the skeptic's careful explanations can seem very distant. The scale is humbling, the isolation absolute. The pilgrims walk the quarries at Rano Raraku, where half-finished giants seem to be emerging from or retreating into, the living rock in mid-stride. Here, the sense of a process abruptly halted is overwhelming. Whether it was a societal collapse or a geological disaster, the feeling is the same. Something ended here. The pilgrims touch the stone, feeling the cool, porous volcanic tuff, and wonder not just how, but why with such desperate intensity. They look from the silent faces to the endless blue horizon, and in that gaze, the idea that these sentinels watch for a homeland lost beneath that very blue becomes not a theory, but a visceral, emotional truth. The journey continues north and west to the drowned city of Nan Madol in Pohnpei. Approaching by small boat, the site emerges from the mangrove channels like a dream. It is a labyrinth of over 90 artificial islets, a Venice of stone built upon a coral reef. The pilgrims wade through shallow, warm water, climbing onto the platforms built from countless basalt logs, each weighing tons. The local guide may tell the legend of the sorcerer brothers who flew the stones with the help of a dragon, a story that feels less like fantasy and more like a cultural memory of a technology beyond understanding. As the heat shimmers and the jungle presses close, the sheer, back-breaking labor implied by the mainstream archaeological narrative clashes with the site's eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. It feels less like a royal citadel and more like a fortress built for a purpose long forgotten, a place of last refuge or sacred isolation. The pilgrims sit in the quiet of Nan Dawa's, the central mortuary enclosure, and the silence is heavy, not empty. It is the silence of a sealed vault holding a secret in the humid air. For the spiritually inclined, the ultimate pilgrimage is not to an island, but to a mountain, Mount Shasta in California. Here, the search is entirely internal. Pilgrims hike the trails, their pockets often heavy with pink Lemurian quartz. They meditate in flower-strewn meadows, seeking the vibration of Telos, the hidden city. They share stories in the towns below of encounters with tall, serene strangers with piercing eyes who offered wisdom before vanishing, said to be Lemurians from the inner earth. At night, they watch for the mysterious lights that sometimes dance near the summit. For these pilgrims, Shasta is not just a mountain, it is a conduit. The physical evidence is irrelevant because the truth is experiential. A feeling of profound peace, a sudden clarity of mind, a sense of ancient memory surfacing. These are the proofs they seek and often find. This modern pilgrimage, whether to the stone questions of the Pacific or the vibrational epicenter at Shasta, reveals that the search for Lemuria is ultimately a search for meaning. The travelers are not just looking for a continent. They are looking for a deeper story to belong to, a narrative that makes the lonely wonders of the world feel connected. And that makes our own place in history feel part of a grand, if tragically interrupted, saga. They walk among the ruins, real and imagined, listening for the echo of that saga in the wind and the waves. The Tamil connection, Kumari Kandam and the Southern memory, while the Pacific Basin claims the name Lemuria or Mu. There exists an equally potent and ancient version of the story from the opposite side of the Indian Ocean. This is the legend of Kumari Kandam, a lost continent chronicled in the ancient Tamil literature of southern India. For the Tamils, this is not a New Age fantasy or a 19th century speculation. It is a foundational pillar of their cultural identity, a golden age recorded in their oldest Sangam poetry. The texts describe a vast territory south of present-day Kanyakumari, a land of rolling hills, fertile rivers, and 49 prosperous kingdoms, the cradle of Tamil civilization and language. They speak of the Pandyan kings who ruled this splendid land, of great academies of poets and scholars, and of a culture of unparalleled sophistication. Then, the legends say, the sea grew angry. In a series of catastrophic deluges, the devouring ocean swallowed the cities, the mountains, and the libraries whole, forcing the people to flee northward, carrying with them the fragments of their knowledge and the enduring sorrow of their loss. The depth and specificity of the Tamil tradition provide a powerful counterpoint to the westernized Lemurian myth. The dates given in some Tamil nationalist interpretations are staggering, suggesting Kumari Kingdom existed tens of thousands of years ago, predating all other known civilizations. The descriptions are not of psychic giants with third eyes, but of a human society of high achievement, a civilization that pioneered Tamil grammar, medicine, martial arts, and navigation. This connection offers a fascinating bridge. To those who believe in a Pacific Mu, Kumari Kingdom is not a separate story. It is the western province of the same lost world. They envision Lemuria as a continent so vast it spanned hemispheres, with its western shores brushing southern India and its eastern heart in the central Pacific. The Tamil people in this view are the direct cultural descendants of the Lemurians who inhabited those western lands. Their flood myth is not a local event, but their eyewitness account of the same global cataclysm that sank the motherland. The shared threads, the advanced knowledge, the catastrophic loss by water, the diaspora, weave the Indian and Pacific narratives into a single tragic tapestry. Modern Tamil scholars and activists have embraced this connection, but with a crucial cultural reclamation. They seek to separate Kumari Kingdom from the occult overtones of theosophy and the Pacific-focused Mu, grounding it firmly in their own literary and historical tradition. For them, it is a point of immense pride and a symbol of cultural endurance. The story validates the antiquity and resilience of Tamil culture. Even as they engage with the geological debate, pointing to the submerged land bridges like Adam's Bridge, Rama's Setu, or the controversial structures in the Gulf of Combat, as potential physical evidence, their primary evidence remains the passionate, detailed memory preserved in their poetry. This living tradition challenges the academic world in a unique way. It is not a theory built on fossils or sonar ghosts, but on a continuous literary lineage that speaks of loss as a historical fact. The Tamil connection thus adds a profound layer of human continuity to the Lemurian mystery. It suggests that the memory of a sunken world is not a vague, global archetype, but a specific, cherished heirloom carried by a specific people for thousands of years, a southern star in the constellation of this great, lost story. The silent testimony of the oceans, corals, cores, and climate, the deepest archive of Earth's history, is not in any library or temple. but in the cold, dark quiet of the ocean floor and the layered bones of ancient reefs. To find truth in the Lemurian mystery, one must consult these silent witnesses. The testimony of the oceans is written in sediment cores and coral fossils, and it speaks a language of slow, colossal change, not of sudden, civilized collapse. Scientists drill deep into the seabed, extracting cylinders of layered muck, sediment cores. These cores are like tree rings for the planet, holding a timeline of climate, volcanic activity, and biological life spanning millions of years. Pollen from long-vanished plants, ash from prehistoric eruptions, and the microscopic shells of creatures that thrived in warm or cold water are all preserved in order. They read these layers for signs of catastrophe that might align with the Lemurian timeline. They find evidence of dramatic events. The eruption of the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia roughly 74,000 years ago, which caused a volcanic winter and may have brought humanity to the brink of extinction. Or the rapid melting of ice caps and consequent sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. These were global traumas, capable of drowning coastal civilizations and searing themselves into human memory as age-ending disasters. But the cores do not show evidence of a continental-scale landmass sinking in the central Pacific within the last 100,000 years. The story they tell is of a changing sea level, not a changing ocean basin. Coral reefs offer another kind of testimony. Corals are meticulous recorders of sea level. They can only grow in shallow, sunlit water. By studying ancient, fossilized reefs now found high on land or deep underwater, scientists can map the precise rise and fall of the ocean over millennia. The data is clear and compelling. Sea level has fluctuated dramatically. During the last glacial maximum, when much of the world's water was locked in ice, sea levels were about 120 meters lower than today. Entire continental shelves were dry, fertile land. The land bridges connecting Asia to Alaska, Australia to New Guinea, and many of the islands of Southeast Asia were exposed. This was not Lemuria as a separate continent, but a vastly different map, a map of joined lands and narrowed seas. Then, as the world warmed, the seas rose, sometimes in rapid surges, drowning these low-lying plains. For any coastal people living there, it would have been the end of their world. Their homelands would have vanished beneath the waves within generations, forcing a relentless retreat. This, the coral record suggests, is the true lost world. Not a Pacific continent, but the Sunderland and Sahel shelves, the vast, now drowned landscapes of Southeast Asia and Australasia. This oceanic testimony reframes the mystery. It takes the cataclysm out of the realm of fantasy and places it into the realm of documented geological fact. The Great Flood was real. Lands were lost. Cultures were dispersed, and their home places erased. The silent witnesses of sediment and coral confirm that the stage was set for a profound human tragedy on a global scale. What the ocean records do not confirm is the actor, the sophisticated, unified Lemurian civilization. They provide the setting for the myth, the plausible backdrop of rising waters and shattered coasts against which the human drama of memory and loss could be played out for thousands of years. The oceans whisper that the world did change beyond recognition, that shorelines did retreat at a pace that felt like a relentless pursuit. In that whisper, The Lemurian story finds its most powerful anchor in reality, not as a history of a sunken rock, but as the enduring human memory of a drowned and forgotten home, wherever and whatever it may have been. The architects of amnesia. Why history forgets the persistence of the Lemurian mystery forces a darker, more philosophical question. Could a civilization truly vanish so completely? Beyond geology and ocean cores, we must consider the architects of amnesia, the processes, both natural and human, that systematically erase the past. The first and most ruthless architect is time itself, wearing the mask of the elements. Imagine a civilization built not of steel and plastic, but of wood, thatch, and even the soft volcanic tuff of Easter Island. Left untended, the jungle reclaims a temple in a century. A wooden city, no matter how grand, dissolves into soil within a millennium. Coastal settlements, the most likely homes for a maritime people, are the most vulnerable. Rising seas and relentless storms would scour them clean, pounding their rubble into sand and scattering it across the continental shelf. Even stone is not immortal. In the humid, volcanic Pacific Rim, relentless rain, lichen, earthquakes, and tectonic subduction grind mountains to dust and drag entire geological records into the planet's molten mantle. The Earth is not a static museum. It is a living recycler. A civilization a mere 10,000 years old, if built in the wrong place with the wrong materials, could leave less trace than a dinosaur. But there is a second, more deliberate architect of amnesia, catastrophe itself. A disaster of the scale imagined for Lemuria does not just destroy, it obliterates the context needed for understanding. It kills the master builders, the teachers, the librarians. It burns the archives written on parchment or palm leaves. It shatters the oral tradition by decimating the populations that carried it. Survivors are thrust into a brutal struggle for immediate survival. The knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and history becomes a luxury, then a fading memory, then a myth. The focus turns to finding food, fresh water, and safety. Within a few generations, the before time becomes a hazy golden age, its practical truths reduced to symbolic stories about gods and floods. The technology to cut and move megaliths might be forgotten, leaving the descendants to stare at the colossal works of their ancestors with the same awe and confusion as any stranger. The civilization does not just fall. It undergoes a rapid, traumatic brain injury from which it awakens with only fractured dreams of its former self. The final architect is perhaps the most subtle, the bias of the present. Modern archaeology is built on a foundation of discovery, but it is also limited by what it expects to find and where it looks. For centuries, the narrative of human progress was linear and Eurocentric. Great civilizations were supposed to arise in river valleys, then spread their light. The idea that a sophisticated culture could have emerged independently in the Pacific, or that its legacy could be carried by seemingly primitive islanders, was unthinkable. This bias dictated where digs happened and how finds were interpreted. It created a form of amnesia not in the past, but in the present, a refusal to see. Even now, funding and research focus on established land-based sites. The vast, expensive, and technically challenging exploration of the submerged continental shelves is in its infancy. We may simply not have looked in the right place or in the right way. The architects of amnesia, time, catastrophe, and bias have built a formidable wall between us and the deep past. The Lemurian legend, in its many forms, is the human spirit throwing ropes over that wall, trying to climb back into a garden we can feel in our bones must have existed, even if all its flowers have turned to stone and silt at the bottom of the sea. The synthesis, a new map of the past caught between the spiritual yearning for a golden age and the rigid skepticism of established science, a more nuanced possibility emerges. It is a synthesis, a new map of the past that does not require a sunken continent in the central Pacific, but which explains why the myth feels so compelling. This synthesis begins with a fundamental truth confirmed by oceanography. The world's coastlines were radically different at the end of the last ice age. Vast, fertile, and now drowned continental shelves, Sunderland connecting Southeast Asia, Sahel linking Australia and New Guinea and others, were exposed. These were not mythical continents, but real habitable lands twice the size of India combined, home to populations for tens of thousands of years. These were the true lost lands. As the seas rose in fits and starts over millennia, these cultures were fragmented, forced into higher ground, and pushed into isolation. Their shared memories of the lush, expansive homelands that slowly vanished beneath the rising tides became the core of the global flood myth. This is not Lemuria, but it is the geographical reality that birthed the archetype of a drowned world. Upon this stage of real geological drama, the synthesis places a more complex human story. It suggests that these early coastal societies, living on the rich resources of the continental shelves, were not primitive. They likely developed sophisticated maritime technologies, astronomy for navigation, and complex social structures much earlier than previously believed. They were the first great explorers, spreading along the coastlines and island hopping across narrowed seas. When the deluge came, it triggered a global diaspora. These displaced, technologically adept peoples carried their skills and their traumatic memories with them as they seeded new cultures. Some moved into the river valleys of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus, possibly catalyzing the first recognized civilizations. Others took to the open Pacific in a much earlier wave than current models suggest, becoming the ancestors of the Polynesians. Another branch might have traveled the kelp highway of the North Pacific to the Americas. In this synthesis, Lemuria is not a place, but an event and its aftermath. It is the collective cultural trauma of the post-glacial flooding, a profound rupture in human history. The advanced knowledge attributed to the Lemurians, navigation, astronomy, megalithic construction, were the survival tools of these shattered coastal cultures, preserved and amplified by their descendants. The mysterious similarities across the Pacific, the megaliths, the flood myths, the shared celestial knowledge, are not evidence of a single source continent, but of a shared ancestral experience of coastal living and catastrophic displacement from the now drowned shelves of Sunderland and Sahel. The true lost civilization is not a single unified entity called Mu, but a mosaic of early advanced coastal cultures whose homelands were erased by the rising ocean. Their legacy is not a sunken city, but the foundations of the world's oldest civilizations and the resilient cultures of the Pacific Islands. This synthesis offers a bridge. It accepts the hard data of geology and genetics while honoring the profound, universal human memory of loss. It suggests we are not searching for a phantom continent, but piecing together the forgotten chapter of a global coastal diaspora, a story not of one lost land, but of many, whose echoes merged into the single haunting name, Lemuria. The Unfinished Dig, Frontiers of Discovery, the story of Lemuria, whether myth or lost history, is far from over. It is an unfinished dig, and the tools of discovery are advancing at a breathtaking pace. The frontiers are no longer just in the earth, but in the digital cloud, in the microscopic world of genetics, and in the deep ocean's perpetual night. The first frontier is underwater archaeology. For decades, the cost and difficulty of exploring the deep continental shelves were prohibitive. Now, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, equipped with high-definition sonar, LiDAR, and 3D photogrammetry, can map vast swaths of the seafloor with centimeter precision. These robotic eyes are just beginning to systematically scan the drowned landscapes of Sunderland, Sahel, and the Bering Land Bridge. They are not looking for pyramids. They are looking for the subtle signs of human habitation. Hearthstones, post holes, middens of shell and bone, submerged caves that served as shelters. Every year, new finds off coasts from Australia to the Baltic Sea prove that humans lived on lands we now consider seabed. The potential to find a preserved coastal settlement from the pre-flood era is no longer a fantasy. It is a matter of time, funding, and careful search. Such a discovery would not prove the existence of Mu, but it would illuminate the real, advanced cultures whose disappearance likely spawned the myth. The second frontier is genetic archaeology. The ability to extract and sequence ancient DNA from skeletal remains, and even from ancient soils, is revolutionizing our understanding of human migration. Scientists are now filling in the blank spots on the map of prehistory with genetic data. Every new genome sequenced from an ancient Pacific or South American skeleton holds the potential to confirm or refute connections. The mysterious Signal X in the Amazon is being actively investigated. Researchers are searching for that same signal in ancient DNA from coastal Asian populations and from the few ancient remains found in Oceania. If it is found and a direct lineage is established, it would force a dramatic rewrite of the peopling of the Americas, potentially opening the door to evidence of a trans-Pacific connection far earlier than thought possible. Genetics is also tracing the precise paths of the Polynesian expansion, timing it with incredible accuracy. Each new data point is a thread that could either weave the Lemurian diaspora into the fabric of reality or further unravel it. The final frontier is perhaps the most profound: artificial intelligence and data synthesis. The amount of data from geology, oceanography, archaeology, linguistics, and genetics is now beyond human capacity to cross-reference fully. AI algorithms are being trained to look for patterns across these disparate fields. They could analyze thousands of flood myths from different cultures to find statistically significant commonalities beyond mere a great flood. They could compare architectural styles, linguistic roots, and artifact distributions across the globe, searching for anomalous connections that defy current historical models. They could process satellite and sonar data of the entire ocean floor, flagging every geometric anomaly for human review. This is not about proving a theory, but about removing human bias from the search for patterns in our past. The AI acts as a neutral sieve, catching the hard nuggets of correlation that both believers and skeptics might have missed. In this new age, the next chapter of the Lemurian story may not be written by a charismatic explorer with a tattered map, but by a quiet processor in a lab, crunching petabytes of data and spitting out a probability, a percentage chance that a forgotten thread connects the stone gods of Easter Island to the flood hymns of ancient Sumer, a digital whisper from a past we are only now learning how to hear. The enduring question, why does Lemuria haunt us? After the sonar scans, the genetic analyses, and the scholarly debates, the most enduring question remains not of stone or sea level, but of the human heart. Why does Lemuria haunt us with such persistence? It is a ghost that refuses to be exorcised by science because it does not live in the rocks. It lives in a deep, shared space within our psyche. The lost continent speaks to a universal human experience, the sense that something precious has been misplaced, a vague nostalgia for a home we have never known. In a world often marked by conflict, alienation, and ecological anxiety, Lemuria represents the antithesis, an imagined past of unity, peace, and harmony with nature. It is a collective sigh for a simpler, more spiritually connected time. This haunting is not a sign of gullibility, but of a profound longing. It is the same longing that fills cathedrals, inspires utopian visions, and sends us gazing at the stars. Lemuria is our species' archetypal Garden of Eden, transposed from a mythical past in Mesopotamia to a mythical past in the Pacific, adapted for a more global, less doctrinal age. This haunting also stems from the undeniable gaps in our own story. Human history, as taught, feels abrupt. The leap from hunter-gatherers to builders of pyramids and astronomers of breathtaking skill seems, at times, too vast. The official narrative has missing pieces, unexplained technologies, and lonely monuments in impossible places. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind abhors a narrative vacuum even more. Lemuria slides into those gaps like a key into a lock. It provides a satisfying, elegant cause for these mysterious effects. It connects the disconnected dots across the map, offering a single, beautiful, tragic explanation for the megaliths, the myths, the shared plants, and the strange genetic whispers. It replaces the confusing, patchwork truth of independent human ingenuity with a cleaner, more dramatic story of a single, brilliant source and a catastrophic fall. This is a powerful, comforting story. It makes the world feel smaller, more knowable, and our place within it more significant as the scattered children of greatness. Ultimately, Lemuria endures because it is a mirror. In its calm, psychic waters, we see reflected our own highest aspirations and our deepest fears. We see our hope for a society built on wisdom, not warfare, on resonance with the earth, not exploitation of it. And we see our terror of apocalypse, of our own technological or spiritual arrogance leading to environmental collapse. The sinking of Lemuria is the ultimate cautionary tale. It warns that even the most advanced civilization is not immune to the forces of nature or to the consequences of its own moral decay. Whether it existed as a physical place or not, its story performs a vital function. It keeps alive the questions that matter. Where did we come from? What have we forgotten? What could we be if we remembered? The Pacific may not hide a sunken continent, but in its vast blue mystery, it holds the perfect symbol for all that is lost, all that is yearned for, and all that might yet be rediscovered, not in the seabed, but in ourselves. The haunting is an invitation to explore, to wonder, and to imagine a better origin, and thus perhaps a better destiny.